I don't know what it is about bikers, but to a certain type of cop, a black helmet and a loud engine might as well be a neon sign that says trouble. Which is how this whole mess started on a quiet stretch of asphalt just outside Franklin County. Two patrol units pulled over a guy who looked like he belonged on the cover of a heavy metal album. Black bike, matte as midnight. Black hoodie, Kevlar jeans, helmet visor down. He hadn't been speeding. He'd used his signals. No plates were missing. But the second he passed their cruiser parked off the shoulder, they pulled out anyway. Routine stop. Or so they thought. One officer approached the rider. The other flanked from the passenger side of the cruiser. License and registration, the lead cop said, hand resting near his holster. The rider said nothing. He didn't even take off his helmet, just slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick leather wallet, the kind that looked like it had seen deserts, storms, and maybe a few wars. The cop opened it. Inside wasn't a driver's license. It was a military ID active, special clearance, name. Ramirez D. Rank Captain, Branch, U.S. Army. The officer frowned. Military. So what brings you out here? Still no response. The other cop stepped in. Sir, we're just trying to. The biker reached to the side of the bike and popped a latch. Not fast, just deliberate. Controlled. He pulled out a small black case the size of a tablet, flipped it open, and showed them a screen. It was encrypted. Military GUI. And locked with a thumbprint scanner glowing green. Sir, I'm going to need you to. That's when both officers' radios screeched, not with dispatch chatter, with a single burst of static, followed by a voice neither of them recognized. Echo Sierra en route. Secure perimeter. Stand down. The voice wasn't local law enforcement, wasn't dispatch, wasn't anyone they knew, and that's when they heard it. Engines, not one, not two, 50, Humvees, tires tore over gravel, dust kicked, lights low, no sirens, just heavy machinery and military silence. They came from every direction, the tree line, the dirt road off the old quarry, even behind the diner 2 miles south. Within seconds, the entire stretch of road was covered. A column of camouflaged vehicles, each bearing insignia that wasn't standard issue. The doors opened. Boots hit the pavement, uniformed soldiers, not regular infantry, not weekend reserves. These were special operations. One man stepped forward, tall, lean, buzz-cut, combat jacket with a name patch, Reese. The biker finally pulled off his helmet, buzzed hair, hard jaw, dark eyes, no emotion. The two men stared at each other for a second. Then Reese saluted. Captain Ramirez, we've secured the area. The cop's hand was still hovering near his weapon. Okay, he said, voice shaky. Can someone explain what the hell is going on? Ramirez looked at him, then stepped toward the case on his bike. He pressed a thumb to the screen. It unlocked. The display lit up, a series of scrambled maps, satellite overlays, and a countdown timer. 00, 12:34, 00, 12:33. Wait, the officer said, eyes locking on the screen. What is that? Ramirez finally spoke, voice low, controlled. You stopped the wrong bike. 10 miles away in a county substation, Chief Linda Voss was pouring coffee when her comms lit up like a Christmas tree. Call from Unit 14. Urgent. Backup requested. Military personnel present. She nearly choked on the first sip. By the time she got to her cruiser, local dispatch was already scrambled. No answers from the scene, just static. Back on the road, Reese leaned toward Ramirez. Team Charlie confirms target dump was triggered. Remote server relay buried under barn structure. 10 minutes until data expires from local buffer. Ramirez nodded. We only get one shot at recovery. He looked back at the stunned cops. You didn't just stop a biker, he said. You interrupted an active field trace. Reese handed him a slim module, looked like a thumb drive dipped in Kevlar. This was in the site perimeter, has a trace log. Ramirez inserted it into the bike's console. The screen updated. A location ping lit up about 1.7 miles east. In the quarry, Reese asked. Looks like it. You want us to escort? Ramirez looked at the officers. No, he said. Let's not turn this into a parade. He turned to the cop still holding his ID. I'm commandeering this scene under Article 24G of Joint Field Ops. You'll stay here. Secure the area. Nobody in. Nobody out. The cop opened his mouth, but Ramirez wasn't waiting. He mounted the bike. The engine growled. Within seconds, he was gone, straight down the road into the tree line. Chief Voss arrived minutes later. The scene was already locked. Soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder. Humvees flanked both ends of the road. Who the hell authorized this? She barked. Reese met her halfway. Ma'am, this is a live federal op. Your officers weren't the target. She narrowed her eyes. You're telling me this was planned? No. I'm telling you the plan got complicated. She looked at the troops, the sealed case, the silent radios, then back at Reese. You know I'm gonna need a report. You'll get a briefing, he said, but not from me. Meanwhile, Ramirez reached the quarry, dead silence, broken trees. Faded equipment, a drone of insects in the heat. He killed the engine, scanned the ridgeline. Nothing. Then he saw it, a rusted-out shack near the edge of the excavation. The door was ajar. He approached. Inside, rows of old monitors flickered dim green. An uplink was active. Small, portable satellite dish hooked into an unmarked black case. The countdown blinked, 0002. 140002. 13. He inserted the drive. The screen flickered. Access granted files began to dump, JPEGs, text logs, radio intercepts, coordinates. Ramirez watched, then movement behind him. Too late. A hand struck from the dark, elbow to ribs, pressure point hit. He dropped to one knee, rolled, came up with a blade from his boot. The attacker was masked. Civilian clothes. Fast, trained. They exchanged 3 blows before Ramirez locked their wrist, flipped them into the wall. Who are you working for? He snapped. The attacker didn't answer, just grinned through bloodied teeth. Then they reached into their coat and detonated a small pulse grenade. EMP burst. Ramirez dropped. The screen went black. The countdown stopped, but the drive blinked. Still active, still recording, back on the road, Reese heard the pulse ping through comms. He muttered he found them. Chief Voss looked at him sharply. Found who? Reese didn't answer, just stepped into his Humvee and radioed command. Blackout confirmed. Target site engaged. Captain Ramirez made contact. Drive still hot. A pause. Then a female voice, cool, calm, and low. Get him out. Quiet. Burn the rest. Reese didn't blink. Yes, ma'am. He turned the key and drove into the trees. Ramirez came to with a headache the size of a Black Hawk rotor and the taste of blood in his mouth. The shack was gone, or rather scorched. The roof had collapsed. The dish was slag. One of the walls was still coughing smoke. He'd been thrown about 8 feet clear. Lucky the blast hadn't ruptured anything vital. His left forearm was bruised bad, maybe fractured. His boot blade was gone, but the drive was still in his hand, cracked, but blinking, still alive. He groaned as he sat up, every bone complaining like it had just been run through basic again. Pulled himself to his feet and staggered toward the tree line where he'd parked the bike. It was gone, of course. He wasn't surprised. But just before panic could creep in, a low growl rose in the distance, engine, familiar, steady. A Humvee pulled around the bend, driver's window down, Reese at the wheel. You don't look good, Reese said, eyes scanning Ramirez's busted arm. I've looked worse. Reese popped the passenger door. Get in, we're burning daylight. Ramirez climbed in, wincing. You bring backup. Reese shook his head. No backup, no air cover, just us. Why? Because whoever lit that shack up knew we were coming. Ramirez went quiet. Then, we've got a leak. Yeah, Reese said, punching the gas. And they're not just leaking plans, they're scrubbing them. Back at the roadblock, Chief Voss was not having a good day. Her officers were still boxed in, their radios jammed or hijacked, and the general feeling around the perimeter was that the military didn't want to talk. She stood in front of a soldier, young, no patch, standing like a statue, and asked the same question she'd asked 5 different ways. Who is your commanding officer? The soldier said nothing. So she got louder. "Son, I've been in this department for 23 years, and I've never once had a domestic joint op show up without a briefing or clearance. Now either you give me a name or I start dialing every oversight board from here to Quantico." Still nothing. But then, a different soldier approached. Older, calm, no rank shown but carried the posture of someone who'd given more orders than they'd taken. "Chief Voss. Who are you?" "Call me Monroe." "That your first name or your last?" He ignored it. "I'm here to let you know Captain Ramirez is alive. He recovered a compromised drive. He's currently en route to a temporary command post." Voss blinked. "Captain who?" "Ramirez. Special clearance." "Why is an army captain carrying encrypted intel through my county on a motorcycle?" Monroe's tone didn't change. "Because that's the only way it was going to stay out of enemy hands." She stared at him. "You think we've got enemy combatants in Franklin County?" Monroe gave the smallest of nods. "Not foreign ones, not today." And then, just like that, he walked away. Reese and Ramirez stopped at a grain silo about 40 minutes south, one of their standing fallback points. It looked abandoned. It wasn't. Inside, they had a SAT-link setup, medical supplies, and a tactical server hub that could run a full decryption off a potato if needed. Reese parked the Humvee tight behind the rear gate. Ramirez walked with a limp, probably ankle damage, but he wasn't going to sit unless bone was sticking out. He slid the drive into the terminal. The screen flickered. Scanned it. Integrity. 62% survivable sectors. 81 decrypting. As the data unpacked, the folders started naming themselves. Ops Sigma Com Node Traffic 12G Divergent Personnel Logs Nebula Archive Access. Reese frowned. That last one's classified blacker than night. Ramirez didn't flinch. "What's in it?" They clicked it open. The first image that loaded wasn't a satellite. It wasn't a weapon system. It was a person, mid-30s, shaved head, civilian clothes, standing at a private airfield. Caption, target, Eric Sloan, civilian, prior service, non-declared ops. Reese leaned in. "Wait, isn't that?" Ramirez nodded. "Sloan was burned 7 years ago, vanished after that op in Tunisia. He's still alive, apparently, and operating." Reese clicked the metadata, last pinged 2 weeks ago. Location, Franklin County. Reese stood up. They weren't hunting data. "No," Ramirez said. "They were hunting him." Meanwhile, at the police substation, Voss got a visitor, not military, civilian, cheap suit, no badge, no ID, just a grin. He walked in like he owned the place, nodded politely to her desk sergeant, and stood in front of her office doorway like a salesman peddling storm windows. "You're Chief Voss." "I am." "You are." He held up a card. It was blank, white. She narrowed her eyes. "Cute." "I'm here to ask you to step away from the perimeter situation, turn over all dashcam footage, and pull your men off the scene." She leaned back in her chair. "And if I don't," his grin didn't change, "I think you will." She stood, walked around her desk, and in one smooth motion took his picture with her phone. "Your face just went out to 27 sheriffs and the AG's office. So unless you want that cute little smirk showing up on a committee hearing next month, I suggest you start talking." The man blinked, just once, then turned and walked out. She stared after him, because that wasn't just confidence. That was someone who didn't fear consequences at all. Ramirez stood at the terminal, reading through the nebula logs. The pieces started clicking. Sloan wasn't just rogue. He was the architect of a breakaway surveillance net, designed for field-testing psychological ops on U.S. soil under the guise of domestic resilience planning. It had been shut down on paper, but Nebula didn't die. It went dark. And now it was running through third-party proxies, contractors, shell firms, and compromised infrastructure. Reese looked up from the log. "Why's it always the ghosts that come back with better funding?" Ramirez didn't laugh. "Because this wasn't funny. It was active." And Sloan had sent out bait, the quarry, the shack. It wasn't a cache. It was a breadcrumb dropped to see who would follow it. Ramirez stared at the log metadata. A ping from a bike relay near the county line, his own bike. Sloan tagged me. Reese went cold. You think he's watching? No, Ramirez said. I think he's waiting. At 7:22 p.m., every street camera in Franklin County glitched at the same time, just half a second, not long enough to trigger alerts. But long enough for a man to step off a chartered bus from Knoxville, carrying a duffel bag and a cheap burner phone. He wore civilian clothes, ball cap, no patch, no scar, but it was him, Sloan, smiling, because tomorrow he was going to knock on the front door of that police station and say 5 words that would append everything. The Franklin County Police Station was quiet just after 9 a.m., too quiet. Chief Voss was reviewing body cam logs from the perimeter standoff when her front desk buzzed. "Chief," said Officer Meadows, voice clipped. "We've got a walk-in. Civilian. Says he's got information about yesterday's incident." Voss didn't even look up. "Tell him to file a report." "He won't," Meadows replied. "He says you'll want to hear it directly. Name's Sloan." Voss looked up so fast her glasses nearly fell off. "Send him in." The man who walked through the door looked nothing like a threat. Early 40s, fit but not showy. Cap pulled low, no weapons, no edge, just calm. He closed the door behind him, then stood, hands at his sides, as if he were here for a dentist appointment. "Chief Voss," he said. "That's me." "You've got a leak." She raised an eyebrow. "Come again." He walked over, opened a leather folder, and placed it on her desk. Inside were 5 photographs, satellite quality, all recent. All showing black, unmarked SUVs outside various locations in the county, the fire department, the school bus yard, even the church. Voss stared at them. "This you?" "No, this is them." "Who's them?" Sloan sat down. "The same people your department called for backup after the biker got stopped. The ones who took over the perimeter. They're not who they say they are." Voss leaned back slowly. "You're saying the military's dirty. I'm saying not all of them are military." She stared. Then said, "Why are you telling me this?" Sloan tilted his head slightly. "Because you still think you're running a department. I'm telling you you're running a theater. And the script was written by someone who wants you to lose control before you even know who the audience is." Before she could respond, he stood. "I'll be in touch." Then he walked out, just like that, leaving 5 high-resolution photos and 100 questions. 20 miles south, Ramirez was in a makeshift medical tent behind the silo. His wrist had been wrapped, his ankle reset. Nothing broken, just rattled. He stared at the decrypted files again. Everything pointed to a clean extraction 2 weeks prior. Someone had removed multiple drives from a military contractor's backup node just before a scheduled audit. That alone wasn't shocking. What was shocking? The node wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't listed in federal contracts, wasn't in any procurement. It had been funded privately through a series of shell companies that all fed into one name, Merwell Industries. Reese walked in, tossing him a bottle of water. "You're gonna love this." Ramirez caught it. "What now?" "Merwell just got a congressional contract for resiliency tech, military-civilian integration. Guess where their pilot city is?" "Don't say Franklin County." Reese just smiled. "That's not a coincidence," Ramirez muttered. "Nope, it's bait." Ramirez nodded once, then stood. "Let's go meet the fishermen." By noon, Chief Voss had security footage queued. Sloan had walked in calm. No weapons. His record, as far as she could tell, had been sealed. There were notes, mentions of former operations, psychological clearance reviews, but nothing that could stick. Her inbox lit up with an alert from the Sheriff's Alliance system. A civilian analyst had recently filed FOIA requests for base supply manifests within a 50-mile radius. Name, Sloan, Eric. Purpose, public procurement transparency. She stared at the screen. He was fishing. For what? She didn't have time to finish the thought, because that's when Officer Daniels knocked on the glass. "We've got movement. The biker's back." Captain Ramirez pulled up outside the station in a beat-up police cruiser Reese had borrowed from a contact at the state barracks. He stepped out slowly, boots crunching gravel, still favoring his left leg. Chief Voss met him on the steps. "You're the one from the roadblock." He nodded. "Captain Ramirez. I was told you disappeared, only long enough to find out why I was here in the first place." She didn't shake his hand. "Your friend," she said. "Sloan, he came in this morning." "He's not my friend. He brought evidence." "I'm sure he did." Voss crossed her arms. "You want to tell me what's actually going on? Because right now, I've got civilians panicking, local cops being sidelined, and an entire stretch of this county being treated like an active op zone." Ramirez sighed, then handed her a tablet. It displayed a schematic of the very police station they were standing in, with 4 red pings marked "Listen," indicating embedded audio bugs. "What the?" He cut her off. "Those were installed using contractor-grade wiring, not DOD, not federal. Someone is monitoring your department to track military movements." "Who?" "Someone running a shadow version of Nebula, a program designed to test civilian compliance under stress scenarios. The version I know was shut down. The version they built, still running." She looked like she was trying not to scream. "And you think Sloan's behind it?" "I think he was, but now I think he's trying to burn it down." She frowned. "Why the change of heart?" Ramirez looked up at her. "Because he's not the threat anymore. The system outgrew him." That night, Voss called a quiet meeting. In her office, herself, Ramirez, Reese, and one officer she trusted above all, her deputy, Connor Briggs. Briggs had grown up in the county, ex-Marine, smart, calm. Ramirez laid it out. "There's a relay being activated remotely from a mobile command node. Could be anywhere. Sloan's been tracking it, but he won't share unless we give him a safe meet point." Briggs leaned forward. "And you trust him?" Ramirez shrugged. "I trust he wants the system gone, that's enough." Voss nodded slowly. "Where?" Ramirez tapped the map. "Here," he said. "Old airstrip, abandoned. Line of sight's clean." Voss looked at Briggs. "You take point." Briggs nodded. Ramirez watched his eyes a little too long, and for the first time felt wrong. At 2 a.m., Sloan arrived at the airstrip. He was alone, no bag, no backup, just a phone and a flash drive. Briggs was waiting. No uniform, just a radio and a concealed sidearm. They stood 10 feet apart. "You came," Briggs said. "I want this ended," Sloan replied. "Then hand it over." Sloan paused. "How do I know it goes where it's supposed to?" Briggs smiled thinly. "You don't." And just like that, he moved. Faster than protocol, drew his weapon, leveled it. "Drop it." Sloan's eyes narrowed. "You're not local." Briggs stepped closer. "Didn't say I was." From the tree line, a lens flicked open. Reese, behind a thermal scope, whispered into comms. "It's him. Briggs is the leak." Ramirez stepped from behind the shack. Weapon raised. "Drop it, Connor." Briggs spun, not fast enough. Ramirez fired once. Leg shot. Clean. Briggs went down hard. The flash drive slid into the dirt. Ramirez grabbed it, nodded at Sloan. "You're done running." Sloan nodded. "Yeah," he said. "But they're not." Behind them, from deep in the woods, the sound of trucks, unmarked, heavy, coming fast. The sound of tires on gravel wasn't just close, it was tight, not a slow convoy. A rapid response. 2 subs, no plates, no lights. Rolling in hot and clean, like they knew exactly where to aim and exactly how fast to hit it. Ramirez shoved the flash drive into his jacket and turned to Sloan. "Run." Sloan shook his head. "Fight." Briggs was on the ground, still conscious but bleeding from the thigh. Ramirez turned and kicked his sidearm out of reach. The first SUV skidded to a stop. Doors opened. 3 men emerged, all black tactical gear, no insignias. NV goggles. Muzzle brakes glinting under the moon. The second SUV idled 30 feet back. A 4th man leaned against the hood, watching. Casual, confident, Ramirez recognized him. Victor, Nebula Original Systems Integrator. The one who wrote the biometric loop code before it was supposedly shut down. "You're far from home," Ramirez called out. Victor stepped forward, voice calm. "You made it loud, Captain." "We were hoping for quiet." Sloan pulled a sidearm. "Then you shouldn't have followed me." Victor smiled faintly. We weren't following you. We were clearing the board. You just weren't gone yet. Ramirez turned to Sloan. They were trying to kill you in the quarry. Sloan nodded. And then cover it up with a systems wipe. Ramirez stepped forward. Too late. We've got the drive. Victor tilted his head. So you think. Behind him, the idle SUV lit up, not headlights. An uplink receiver mounted on the hood began to glow blue. The nebula system wasn't just passive anymore. It was mobile. Sloane's eyes widened. They're trying to live scrub me. You're wearing a biometric relay? Ramirez asked. I didn't know it was active. The uplink flashed once, then twice. Ramirez's earpiece screamed, not with sound but feedback. Low-band ultrasonic burst. He ripped it out just in time. Sloane dropped to one knee. You okay? Ramirez asked. Sloane gritted his teeth. They're feeding false data into my neural pattern. Victor smiled. That's the beauty of Nebula Phase 2. It doesn't need to fake your behavior anymore. It just adjusts it. Emotional distortion, perception layering, real-time cognitive redirection. Ramirez stepped back toward the shack. He needed cover. Reese's voice hissed over the secondary radio. Got two eyes on the ridge. Can take the rear SUV's tires. Ramirez whispered back, do it. Pop, pop, silence. Then the second SUV dropped on its axles, tires shredded. The tactical team turned fast. Sloane used the distraction to pull Ramirez behind the shack. Drive still intact. Ramirez pulled it out, checked it. Yeah, still blinking. Then it's time to end it. Back at the station, Chief Voss stared at the blinking icon on her tablet. Ramirez had just activated a high-bandwidth relay, untraceable by standard infrastructure. It only meant one thing: he was uploading. And if he was doing that now, it meant the operation was either finished or about to blow up. She grabbed her vest, sidearm, and car keys. Where are you going? Asked Officer Meadows. To find out how deep this thing goes, she said, and to make sure our people remember who they work for. At the airstrip, the fight escalated. Reese had moved downhill, flanking the far side of the field. He picked off one of the SUV team's flankers, shot straight through the leg. Not fatal, but enough to disrupt their formation. Sloane lobbed a small EMP round from a wrist rig, landed it near the uplink. Boom! The signal died. Victor swore in Russian, turned toward his men. Engage full. That was the order. No more posturing. They moved in, close quarters. Ramirez ducked behind a fuel tank, caught his breath, then activated the drive's emergency protocol. It sent out a scrambled mirror dump, not just to Central Command, but to every unsecured router within a 20-mile radius. The kind of blast that couldn't be ignored. Within seconds, hospital systems, school servers, even cell towers started logging ghost activity, pings tied to Nebula framework. It was too public now, too big to hide. That was the point. Ramirez stood. Sloane was covering fire to the west. Reese was circling for a flanking shot. Victor's team had no backup because nobody wanted to admit they were part of it anymore. The smoke was starting to clear. Then Ramirez saw movement from the ridge, another vehicle, not tactical, civilian SUV, black Ford. It pulled up hard, tires screeching. The door opened. Chief Voss, she stepped out with her service weapon raised. Everybody drop IT. Everyone froze, even Victor. She walked into the center of the field like it belonged to her. Captain Ramirez, you have evidence? He nodded. She extended a flash drive reader. Plug it in. He did. It lit up and mirrored the entire Nebula core structure across her dashboard. She looked at Victor. You're done. Victor raised his hands slowly, said nothing. Then a gunshot, not from him, from behind Voss. One of his downed men, faking unconsciousness, raised a sidearm. Ramirez dove, crack, bullet clipped Voss's shoulder. She dropped. Reese put the shooter down a second later. Ramirez rushed to her. You good? She coughed, nodded. Nothing vital. She handed him her radio. Put this out. Let the public know. They need to know. Within minutes, Nebula framework was exposed. The push wasn't clean. Not every system accepted the blast. But enough did. Journalists picked it up. Tech analysts, data watchdogs, redacted pages began to surface on forums and encrypted feeds. The name Nebula became public knowledge for the first time. Victor and his team were detained unofficially. There was no press, no arrests, just quiet disappearances. Sloan refused to leave with Ramirez's team. "I'm not made for command," he said. "I'm made for the shadows." "You sure?" Ramirez asked. Sloan nodded. "But if the system ever tries this again," he looked at him square, "burn it before it breathes." A week later, Ramirez sat in a classified debriefing. They tried to spin it. System miscalibration. Behavioral modeling error. Unauthorized third-party expansion. Ramirez sat through it all, then stood, and dropped the nebula schematics on the table. "No," he said. "This was designed to overwrite human instinct, and the moment you let it live, you turned every soldier into a test case." The room was silent. Then a general spoke. "So what are you proposing?" Ramirez gave a tired smile. "A firewall." Back in Franklin County, Chief Voss returned to work with a stitched shoulder and a new file folder on her desk. Inside, recommendations for a new county oversight board, not military, not civilian contractors, just people who knew the signs. She smiled. Because sometimes it only takes one blown up to make sure the next one never gets off the ground. 3 weeks later, location. Arlington, VA, undisclosed federal briefing room. Captain Ramirez stood across from a long table lined with men and women in suits too sharp for comfort. The screen behind him showed the nebula schematic, the red thread version, not the cleaned-up one the contractors had spun for PR. He finished his presentation with the same sentence he'd used a dozen times since this all started. "You can't outsource accountability." One of the men leaned forward. "You're proposing a military-wide rollback of biometric prediction systems. You know that costs billions." Ramirez didn't flinch. "So does rebuilding trust." Another suit piped up. "You also propose that all personnel flagged under Nebula protocols be re-cleared, including former Black Op operatives." He nodded. "Starting with Sloan." A few murmurs. One woman scribbled something in a leather-bound notepad. "And you trust him?" Ramirez met her gaze. "No. But I respect what he did when no one else would." There was a pause. Then the first man nodded. "Fine. You'll get limited rollback authority just for Tier 1 bases. Pilot project." Ramirez didn't move. "I want Fort Franklin included." "It's not Tier 1. It is now." He stared until the man caved. "Fine." Ramirez turned and walked out, one more fire finally out. Back in Franklin County, Chief Voss sipped black coffee and watched the morning news. The Nebula exposé had gone national, but it wasn't being called Nebula. It was dubbed the Franklin Program. Sounded more like a civic grant than a psychological manipulation experiment. But hey, branding wins battles. Still, buried in the story was something Voss had caught before most, a name. Connor Briggs, former deputy, now vanished, declared AWOL. Military records sealed, no body found, and that's when it hit her. Connor wasn't a leak inside her department. He was the original plug sent to pose as a local, embed for years and protect the Nebula infrastructure if it ever reached operational level. A sleeper, trained, activated. She pulled out the photo from the briefing, the one of him when he'd first applied. There it was, the faintest patch on his sleeve, not Marine, not National Guard, a contractor group emblem, Merwell. Ramirez met Sloan at a private airfield outside Knoxville. No names exchanged, just a nod. "You kept your distance," Ramirez said. "Had to." Ramirez tossed him a slim packet. "Officially, you're now a field consultant." Sloan cracked a grin. "Is this the part where I get a badge?" "No," Ramirez said. "This is the part where you get a burner phone, 3 aliases, and a mandate." "Mandate?" Ramirez stepped closer. "There are still echoes of Nebula, subsystems that didn't burn with Victor. We need someone off-grid to track them." Sloan nodded. "And when I find them?" Ramirez didn't answer. He didn't have to. The final cleanup started at the old silo. Reese led a quiet demolition op, nothing flashy. Just a data sweep, a hardware wipe, and a controlled burn. When it was done, he left one thing buried in the rubble, a patch, olive green, no unit name. Just one stitched phrase. Trust your gut. The phrase started showing up in other places, too, on whiteboards at Fort Bragg, on sticky notes at command terminals in Fort Stewart, even spray-painted in small, discreet letters on the side of a Humvee in Ramstein. The message was clear. The machines may calculate faster, but instinct still drives the man. 6 months later, Ramirez returned to Franklin County, not in uniform, no entourage. He stopped at the gas station just off the main road. The clerk, a teenager with too much hair gel and too little awareness, barely looked up. "You military?" Ramirez smiled. "Not today." He walked back to the pump, parked there, an old black bike, worn leather, matte finish, no one in sight. Just a folded piece of paper tucked under the saddle strap. Ramirez unfolded it. 4 words, "It's not over yet." E.S. He pocketed it, looked at the sky, and smiled. Because the war might be over, but the system never sleeps.